welcome back here to Viewpoints. I'm your host, Jordan Voiles. I'm sitting here with Dr. John Gerlach. Today, we're going to be talking about experiencing God. We've just started a new sermon series. So, John, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, I'm excited about these next several weeks that we're going to be in First John, because First John is a great book about new beginnings and taking a diagnostic for our spiritual life and that sort of thing. So I want to go ahead and ask you to name the 12 disciples.
I'm not doing that. I can't do
Okay,
it.
you're not going to do it. So the three disciples that were closest to Jesus were James and John and Peter. Now, if I were to narrow it down to who was absolutely the closest disciple to Jesus, I think it's John. At least John felt that way because he kind of refers to himself that way as the beloved disciple, that sort of thing.
He writes it that way.
Yeah, he writes it that way. So, I mean, if I wanted to get to know you, I would talk to someone who really knew you and that was closest to you. And I think we have a great perspective because we get to hear from John, the disciple that was closest to Jesus, and kind of his perspective on things, some things that he thinks are real important. And just a little backdrop to First John for people. What happened was John is the only disciple who did not get killed for his faith, not martyred. He was older at this point, looking back at his life, but he also saw some problems in the church. He saw some problems among Christians, which there were some things, some controversies, some heresies going on, and basically people were accepting from their culture, like, well, all these other beliefs, basically, and not being faithful to their faith. And so he's addressing that. He's also giving us this great perspective of being that close to Jesus. And so it's just a great book to say, you've got a next move. That's why we call the series that, because everybody's got a next spiritual move. Sure. You can call it a next step, a next move, whatever. And so I wanted to just think about some new things. I think, we're at the, close to the beginning of a new year. There's going to be some new things that happen in life for all of us. And so I put down this list on the blog. So I want you to kind of look at it. And anything, you want to share that, is new for, you think might be ahead or has already been, or even last year, recently.
Yeah.
All right. So, new job. Do we need to talk about that one?
I got some new teeth,
That's on their new teeth. That could be a crown or whatever.
Well, I think looking at it, probably a new house was the big one for us.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Which having a new perspective on finances after that.
Yeah, you got new viewpoint on finances because of that. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I see what you're saying as far as like something new kind of makes you look in a different direction. I think that's what you're saying. Is that correct?
Yeah. It just makes you think about things maybe differently, different perspective, that sort of thing. And that's what John wants to do. So let me read the first four verses of First John. And it says, that which was from the beginning. I'm going to kind of just break it down a little bit. If that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we've seen with our eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. Now, a couple things here. He's talking about Jesus. He's calling Jesus the word of life, and he calls Jesus life. And I think that's a great way to look at it because there's so many other things we can chase in life, but true life is going to come through Jesus. And it says the life appeared. We have seen it, testify it. We proclaim to you the eternal life, which was with the Father, appeared to us. We proclaim to you what we have seen and heard, so that you may also have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father, with his Son, Jesus Christ. We write this to make our joy complete. So I think a couple things there. I think one of the big things here is this is an eyewitness. This might be one of the few remaining eyewitnesses of Jesus at this time, and it's John. And he's like, I got to let you know that Jesus was real. This is not a, I've heard people, I don't know if you've ever heard this or somebody says, well, I believe in the spirit of Jesus. I'm not sure he really lived or whatever.
Yeah.
But he's not a spirit. It wasn't like, like Abraham Lincoln's spirit,
Sure.
Or whatever. This is truly, someone in history that changed everything. And so one of the things he talks about here is just, hey, you need to know there, and he describes this close contact and this personal encounter. And I think that's the main thing I want us to think about today is just faith is always supposed to be not just duty, but also joy, but mainly relationship.
Mhm.
And I think people can go one way or the other, kind of extreme on that. Like you have the person who's just all about, I've got to be a good person. I've got to live really good, and there's some truth to that. And then there's the other person that says, well, no, I just want to have this very close relationship with God and kind of that be my foundation and just depend on that. There's some truth in that.
Mhm.
But what John's going to say is let's put both of those together. And it is about experiencing God. So,
Mhm.
I mean, what I want to ask you is what have you seen in people's lives where their faith becomes, I was reading this book yesterday and it's a fictional book, but it's about
Mhm.
a pastor. And he says, well, my sermons are like cardboard. And he's like saying, my spiritual life is just, he's kind of struggling. He's talking to a friend in the book and all this kind of stuff. So, what do you see,
Mhm.
or what are some signs of that happening that you've seen personally or in other people's lives where it starts becoming a routine? It's not the relationship, like I need to have my prayer time
Yeah.
to just talk to God, but it becomes just checking off the box
Yeah, yeah.
and that kind of thing.
That's a good question. Um, I've seen a lot of people like compartmentalize stuff. Like, um, I have my church friends over here, and I have my church over here. I really don't talk about that, but I also have like my outside friends over here, and then this becomes like a system in and of itself, but it's a bad system.
Mhm.
We were talking with someone the other day, and I was like, "Do you have good friends that you can talk about God with?" And they're like, "Well, I have a ton of friends, but none that I can talk about God with."
Mm.
And so that kind of led us down the road of like, well, which leads me into the question that I wanted to ask you, but I think it goes hand in hand of like, do you think that's a good indicator? You asked me the question, have I seen it? I see it a ton with people that aren't experiencing life
Yeah.
with
Mhm.
friends, family,
Yeah.
and even church sometimes can just, like you said, can just be checking off the box. But do you think that's a good indicator of going like, do your friends, the church, is it bringing life?
Mhm.
Do you think that would be maybe one of those engine check lights that's a good indicator that you're probably not walking in the path that you should? Because that's kind of where the conversations went when I was talking to these individuals of like, if you're in church, if you're with godly people, if you're not godly people, it should be feeding you. And a lot of times it's draining us. And that's where you see people on burnout. I
Mhm.
guess if that's answering your question. But I kind of wanted to throw it back at you of like, is that a good way that we can gauge that with
Mhm.
going like, this just isn't bringing me life? And
Yeah, I think one of the things we're going to find in First John is exactly that. I'm glad you brought up the check engine light because
mhm.
I have two vehicles that have check engine lights on right now. Just
Uh-oh.
thanks for that depressing thought.
Uh-oh.
But no, it really is like that
Mhm.
spiritually, where we go, okay, well then what's going on? If it is just going through the motions, if it is just checking the box, what is the issue? And the check engine light is on spiritually.
Yeah.
And one of the things that John's going to point to is, he talks about fellowship. And, this is the word koinonia. This is the word, this close relationship. It's basically like we have this relationship with Jesus and we want you to have the same thing. And so we're
Mhm.
going to write this letter,
Mhm.
First John, to talk about that and how you can make sure you can have that not going through the motions relationship, but this personal relationship. And so it's kind of where it's going to go. So no, I think it's a great example.
Yeah. What would you say to the person that's like, well, I go to service, I go to church. I don't really need
Mhm.
godly people or godly friends or godly community. I mean, wouldn't you say that that in and of itself is danger? It's not just telling
Yeah.
people, "Oh, okay, you go to Sunday worship, you're good."
Yeah.
So, like, what would you say to the person that is like, "I'm checking off the Sunday,"
Mhm.
and not having the spiritual community? I guess
Yeah.
like what we do through our Mondays and Wednesdays with our church groups.
Yeah. I think you just got to have it. It's a very interesting, phenomenon. And honestly, I haven't seen that much before, but it makes a lot of sense. We have people that are in like three groups.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
offer groups on Sundays and during the week.
Yeah.
We have people that are in three. I have some people in my group that are in two other groups, and at first I was like, why do you?
Hmm.
We need it. We just got to have it. It's just where they're at. Some of them are new Christians, and they just felt like they needed that to help them grow. They were kind of just same old, and they wanted really to grow, and so they did that. So it's not, sometimes you got to even just what is the new that I need spiritually, and that's, John's going to chase that. But I
Mhm.
think and a good example of this is an example would be prayer. If somebody says to me, um, I want to see if prayer works. Well, that tells me a lot about them, because that communication with God is just a formula.
Mhm.
It's not a I get to talk to God. I get to tell God about what I'm issues. Or I get to ask him about it, versus somebody who has an ongoing conversation with God all day long that goes, "Hey God, I think I'm going to do this. No, you don't want me to? Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't do that." This ongoing kind of thing. God, I'm really struggling with this. And God's that
Yeah, that's good.
one's a relationship,
Mhm.
one's a, hey, I just need to get some stuff.
Mhm.
And so it's really a kind of e- even the things we do, reading the Bible, prayer, those kind of things, go to church. The ultimate of that is that we are having a relationship. I mean, it's like worship.
Mhm.
It's there's singing songs, and then there's I'm coming into his presence
Yeah.
and I'm praising him, which is two totally different things. Though they're, you're doing one, they're related, obviously, but there's a whole different level.
Mhm. Well, you I think it was 2 Sundays ago you were preaching, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because it was like so many times I go before the Lord in prayer, and I just pray kind of like these formula prayers of, like you said, kind of checking the box off. But you packaged it in a way of like, wow, that's fresh. That's a fresh perspective, a new perspective. Like, he's your dad,
Mm.
he's your father, and he cares for you. And it's like we hear that all the time, but it's like, no, like, yeah, I should be able to go to him with just normal stuff that I'm going through throughout the day. And then you talked about, if someone has had a bad earthly perspective of father, it could bleed into that perspective of your
Mhm.
prayer
Yeah.
life. And so the way you packaged that was really, really good, and it helped me to have a new perspective. But, in this sermon series, we're talking about next moves. And so maybe to the listener, what would be some ways that you could say, like, here are some next moves, or here are some examples that you can take when it comes to experiencing God in a different way, or maybe just throughout the whole sermon series? What would you?
Yeah, I think to take the challenge about, especially to me, it's one good example is prayer, because prayer is something that's, in every relationship you got to have communication. You hear about people that have jobs where they have to both travel, they're not with each other, they don't communicate as well because they're apart, and the relationship's going to be under a strain
Mhm.
because of that. Prayer is just I mean, you think about it, you step back and you go, we get to talk to God.
Yeah.
What? We get to talk to God, and we just kind of take it for granted. But this is something that can be so personal, so life changing, so an ongoing conversation throughout the day. Or it can be, God, I pray, I'm going to, the typical prayer: keep us safe, bless the family, don't let any bad stuff happen. Amen.
Hmm.
I'm going to pray those things, but it's more, and I feel like God's going, wait. Are we not going to, you know,
Hmm.
and I'd finish with this one picture that I would just challenge everybody to. It's kind of like going to lunch with a friend. If you go, I one time went to lunch with somebody who had an agenda, a printed agenda for our lunch. And this was somebody that I'm like, this is my friend. And the friend went out the window.
Hmm.
I mean, it was like, what are we doing here?
Hmm.
And well, I've got some stuff we need to discuss. And this is, it's like, so we're having lunch for you
Yeah,
to
that's weird.
have this agenda.
Hmm.
And I thought that's what I do with God. And that I want to just encourage you to not do that with God,
Hmm.
to come to God with your simple agenda. That's so weird in a relationship. It's so weird spiritually,
Yeah.
honestly, but we do it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I just encourage everybody to find the
That's
new
good.
of that. What
Hmm.
is the new level of that is truly a relationship where you experience God, you know him, and it's a personal relationship.
That's good. I do want to counter that, just and ask the question, because I think that's a great example of what our prayer life should be. What would you say to the person that doesn't know what to say, or doesn't even know how to pray, and maybe they meet with God in those, those moments of
Mhm.
a picture of a lunch. It's like they have nothing to say, or
Yeah.
don't even know how to conversate with God.
Right.
I heard a theologian say one time, like some of his most powerful prayers was when he had nothing to say.
Mhm.
But what would you say to someone that's like, I don't even know how to pray?
Mhm. Yeah, I think I think so that's very true. I think there's gonna be times we don't have anything that is hard to express. But I think one of the key things is just truly pour out your heart, your
Hmm.
worries, your concerns, your hey, thank yous to God,
Yeah,
and don't come in with the agenda. I
yeah.
mean, it's okay to, I'm not saying you should never have an
No, I see.
agenda with God, sure. But if nothing else, just pour out your heart. And it's kind of, it's real interesting you said that because there's been times with couples that are engaged, and I'll say, you guys need to pray together. And they'll look at each other and go, what?
Oh,
And I
yeah,
said, there's something so powerful for you to hear the other person give you to God.
right.
It's the same thing about everything else. It's the
Yeah.
same kind of power.
It's
So,
awesome. Pastor John, thank you so much. The listener, we pray that you stick with us through this sermon series, and you just travel along the journey as we find out our next steps. God bless, and we'll see you next time.